Somewhere in your fireplace right now, sitting in a grey pile you will probably sweep into the trash, is the most undervalued soil amendment in modern gardening. American homeowners burn over 20 million cords of firewood every year and produce roughly 1 million tons of wood ash. Almost all of it goes to the landfill. Meanwhile, the global potash fertilizer industry sold over $33 billion of mined potassium in a single year, a product chemically almost identical to what you sweep off your hearth. The record opens in colonial Massachusetts around 1788. 250 potash works operated across the state, turning ordinary wood ash into the most valuable agricultural product in early America. The very first patent ever granted by the United States government, issued in 1790, was awarded for an improved potash production process. Farmers from Sweden to Sumeria to New England had used wood ash for thousands of years to grow tomatoes that ripened heavy on the vine, to fight slugs without poison, to raise acidic soil back into fertility. The knowledge was so common, it was barely written down. The hearth itself was the document. So what happened? Beginning around 1909, German mining companies discovered massive underground potash deposits in Stassfurt and quickly built a global monopoly on mined potassium salts. Within 2 generations, ancient ash wisdom was buried under bags of synthetic potash sold by a multinational industry now valued at over $33 billion annually. The very word potash, which comes from pot ash, the original potassium fertilizer made by leaching wood ashes in iron pots, was rebranded into something you had to buy in a sealed bag. The hearth is still full of fertilizer. They simply convinced you the door was locked. A 2025 study published in Frontiers in Soil Science found that soils amended with wood ash produced twice the biomass yield of unamended control plots in the first growing season, while also lowering soil bulk density and significantly raising cation exchange capacity. A 2024 Science Direct review confirmed wood ash applications of 16 to 32 tons per hectare delivered the highest pasture yields across multiple test years. The knowledge was never lost. It was simply made inconvenient to sell. Here are the 4 wood ash tricks they never told you about. Trick 1. The planting hole. Pour. Calcium delivered the instant roots form. If you have ever lost half your tomato harvest to blossom end rot, that dark, sunken, leathery patch on the bottom of your fruit, you have lost it to calcium deficiency. Synthetic fertilizers correct nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but they leave the calcium problem unsolved because calcium is rarely included in standard formulations. The result is a tomato plant with strong leaves, plenty of blossoms, and fruit that rots from the bottom up before you can pick it. Wood ash is roughly 25% calcium by weight, in the form of calcium oxide and calcium carbonate, both of which break down in soil moisture into plant-available calcium ions. It also contains 5 to 7% potassium, the same potassium that the $33 billion potash industry mines from underground and sells back to you. It also contains magnesium, phosphorus, boron, copper, and zinc in trace amounts. Your tomato roots need to build cell walls, fruit, and seed. A study from the University of Kuopio in Finland confirmed that wood ash applied at the moment of transplant significantly increased both the size and the yield of tomato fruit across the entire growing season. The mechanism is timing. When you bury a young tomato plant, the root system spends its first 2 to 3 weeks building the architecture it will use for the rest of its life. Calcium and potassium delivered into that root zone at that exact moment become integrated into the plant's structural development in a way that no top dressing applied 2 months later can replicate. To apply it, dig your tomato or pepper planting hole 8 to 12 inches deep. Drop 1½ cups of cooled, dry wood ash into the bottom of the hole. Mix it thoroughly with the surrounding soil so it does not contact the root ball directly. Add your transplant. Backfill. Water in deeply. Then top dress with 1/2 cup of ash scattered lightly around the base of the plant, scratched into the surface before you mulch. You do this once per plant, once per season. By the time your first fruits begin to set, the calcium will already be inside the developing tomato. Blossom end rot, the most painful failure in vegetable gardening, simply does not appear. The Finnish farmers who first documented this effect were not chemists. They were gardeners working with what their fireplaces gave them for free. Trick 2. The pest barrier ring. The slug defense their pellets cannot replicate. A slug eats your hosta, your lettuce, your young brassicas, and your strawberries by gliding across the soil on a layer of mucus it secretes from its foot. That mucus is the entire engine of slug movement, and it is also the slug's vulnerability. Anything that disrupts mucus production stops the slug in its path. The commercial slug control industry sells you metaldehyde pellets that work by destroying the mucus glands chemically, at a cost to your pets, your birds, and your soil microbiome. Wood ash works by a purely physical mechanism that does not poison anything. The fine, abrasive ash particles absorb the moisture from the slug's mucus on contact, while the alkalinity of the ash chemically irritates the foot tissue. The slug cannot cross the barrier without losing the ability to move. It turns around. A 2020 laboratory and semi-field study published in MDPY. Applied Sciences tested wood ash from 7 different tree species against the Spanish slug, one of the most destructive garden pests in Europe. Oak and beech wood ash produced the strongest barrier effect, with only 10% of plants protected by oak ash showing any slug damage at all. The researchers identified copper content in oak and spruce ash as a contributing factor because slugs absorb copper directly through their foot tissue, where it inhibits movement and feeding. West Virginia University Extension and the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources have both documented wood ash alongside diatomaceous earth as an effective slug barrier when applied as a continuous ring of dry material around vulnerable plants. The applied science is consistent across continents. To apply the barrier, sprinkle a continuous ring of dry wood ash around each plant or bed you want to protect. The ring should be roughly 3 inches wide and 1 inch deep. Keep the ash off the leaves and stem. Reapply after rain, because once wood ash gets wet, it loses its abrasive and absorbent properties and the barrier breaks. In dry weather, a single application can protect a bed for 1 to 2 weeks. In wet weather, expect to reapply every few days. This is the closest thing to a free, chemical-free, instant slug solution that exists in modern gardening. The pellet industry has spent decades convincing gardeners that the only answer is a packaged product. The hardwood in your fireplace tells a different story. Trick 3. The potassium tea. A liquid mid-season drench for ripening tomatoes. By the time your tomato plants are 6 weeks into fruit set, they are pulling potassium out of the soil faster than any other macronutrient. Potassium drives the flow of water and sugars throughout the plant. It is the nutrient that turns a green, unripe tomato into a deep red, sweet, fully ripened fruit. When potassium runs low in mid-season, you will see the signs immediately. Yellowing along the edges of older leaves, tomatoes that ripen unevenly with green and yellow shoulders that never turn red. Cracked fruit. Slow ripening that drags on for weeks. The synthetic answer is to side dress with potassium chloride, a mined product that delivers potassium fast and disappears into runoff almost as quickly. The ancient answer is wood ash tea, a slow, controlled potassium drench that releases the nutrient over weeks, not hours. A 1992 study published by researcher Tsutomu Ono at the University of Maine demonstrated that wood ash potassium is water-soluble and releases readily into soil suspensions within minutes of application, while the alkalinity is buffered by soil contact. This makes wood ash tea an effective, fast-acting potassium source without the harshness of a direct, dry application near sensitive root zones in midsummer. To brew the tea, place 2 cups of dry wood ash inside a cloth bag or an old pillowcase tied at the top. Drop the bag into a 5-gallon bucket of water. Let it steep for 4 to 7 days, stirring once a day. The liquid will become a pale gray-brown, faintly alkaline solution, rich in dissolved potassium, calcium, and trace minerals. Remove the bag. Dilute the tea 1:1 with fresh water before applying. Pour 1 to 2 cups of the diluted tea around the base of each fruiting tomato plant once every 2 weeks during peak fruiting. Apply in the morning when the soil is already damp. Within 10 to 14 days, you will see the difference in fruit color, ripening speed, and overall plant vigor. The yellowing leaves will green up. The stalled green tomatoes will begin to turn. Scandinavian and Finnish farmers used variations of this method for centuries, especially in cold climate gardening, where the short growing season made it critical to push tomatoes through to full ripeness before the first frost. The technique was practical, repeatable, and free. Trick 4. The compost accelerator. The pH lever that wakes a sluggish pile. Most home compost piles fail not from lack of material, but from acid stall. Kitchen scraps, especially citrus peels, coffee grounds, fruit waste, and grass clippings, ferment rapidly in the early stages of decomposition and produce organic acids that drop the pile's pH into the 4 to 5 range. At that acidity, the bacteria and fungi that drive aerobic decomposition slow down, stall, or die off entirely. The pile sits there, wet, slow, and smelly, sometimes for months. A 2011 study from the University of Helsinki, published in Bioresource Technology, demonstrated that adding low doses of wood ash to municipal bio-waste compost piles significantly buffered the early acidic phase, accelerated the onset of effective microbial decomposition, and reduced the formation of malodorous gases throughout the early process. Researchers at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences confirmed similar acceleration effects in pilot-scale and full-scale composting trials across Scandinavia, where cold climate composting frequently struggles with acid stall. A 2015 Science Direct study confirmed that wood ash incorporated at 2 to 8% by weight raised initial substrate pH into the optimal 6 to 7 range for aerobic decomposition, increased nutrient content of the finished compost, and improved oxygen availability throughout the pile. The result was faster breakdown, less odor, and richer compost ready for application weeks earlier than untreated piles. The deeper insight is structural. The synthetic fertilizer system replaces what your compost would have built. Each season, dependency increases. Wood ash buffered compost works in the opposite direction. The finished product carries calcium, potassium, magnesium, and trace minerals into your garden along with the biology of your kitchen scraps, building a soil foundation that needs less external input over time, not more. To apply, sprinkle 1 to 2 cups of dry wood ash for every cubic foot of fresh compost added to the pile. Mix it in lightly. Do not overload the pile. Excessive ash above 10% by volume can drive pH too high, volatilize nitrogen, and shut the process down. A light, consistent dusting alongside your weekly kitchen scraps is exactly enough. By the time your spring compost is ready, you will have a finished product that is darker, drier, and more nutrient-dense than untreated compost from the same materials. But moderation matters here in a way it does not for the other amendments in this garden. Wood ash is the only common kitchen and wood stove byproduct that genuinely requires careful application. 3 specific warnings carry across every extension office that has studied this material. The wrong wood is the first risk. Safe ash comes from untreated hardwood, fruitwood, untreated firewood, and clean barbecue wood. Dangerous ash comes from pressure, treated lumber, painted wood, plywood, particle board, charcoal briquettes that contain chemical accelerants, driftwood loaded with salt, and fire starter logs. The ashes from these materials carry heavy metals, arsenic, sodium, and synthetic compounds that will poison your soil and contaminate any food grown in it. Never use ash from any wood you would not eat off of. The burn zone is the second risk. Wood ash applied too heavily can raise soil pH dramatically, lock out iron and manganese, and chemically burn fine root hairs. The University of New Hampshire Extension recommends a maximum dry application rate of 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet, scattered evenly and worked into the top inches of soil. The planting hole application of 1.5 cups per tomato is well below this threshold because it is localized and incorporated. Broadcasting heavy layers across entire beds repeatedly is where gardeners get into trouble. The pH trap is the third risk. Wood ash is alkaline, and over time regular applications will shift your soil chemistry permanently in the alkaline direction. This is fine for tomatoes, peppers, brassicas, and most vegetable crops, which prefer slightly alkaline conditions. It is devastating for acid-loving plants. Never apply wood ash near blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, holly, or potatoes, which are vulnerable to scab in alkaline soils. And test your soil pH annually if you are using wood ash regularly with an inexpensive home test kit or a $15 to $20 soil test from your county extension office. These 3 rules are not bureaucratic warnings. They are the boundary lines that separate a powerful free amendment from a destructive one. Stay inside them, and wood ash does work. No commercial product can replicate. Cross them, and you will undo a season's worth of effort. But it survived. The knowledge never disappeared into corporate vaults or regulatory archives. While the synthetic potash industry was consolidating into a $33 billion global system, a quiet network of university extension agronomists, Scandinavian farmers, and stubborn gardeners preserved these techniques through generations of institutional neglect. The University of New Hampshire Extension, Michigan State University Extension, West Virginia University Extension, and the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources have all published field research confirming what colonial American farmers and Scandinavian crofters knew before potash was a brand name. Studies published between 2011 and 2025 at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, the University of Helsinki, and Frontiers in Soil Science documented yield improvements, soil pH buffering, slug control, and soil structural changes that no bag of mined potassium fertilizer has ever fully replicated. Colonial Massachusetts ran 250 potash works in 1788 because the product worked. Finnish farmers documented tomato yield increases with wood ash because the calcium and potassium were doing exactly what tomato plants required. The Spanish slug studies in Slovenia confirmed barrier effects that European farmers had known for hundreds of years before a research paper put a number on the result. Today, that knowledge is accelerating. Not because the industry permitted it, Because the research became undeniable, and because home growers, tired of buying products that vanish in a single rain, started asking why the grey powder in their fireplace was being thrown away. The silence around wood ash is breaking. You can grow what they silenced. Start with a soil test from your county extension office, usually $15 to $20, to identify your baseline pH and your specific nutrient deficiencies. Then build your wood ash routine strategically. If you are planting tomatoes or peppers this season, the 1.5 cup planting hole application is the highest impact, single-use, single-application trick in this video. If slugs are eating your hostas, lettuce, or strawberries, the dry barrier ring will work overnight. If your tomatoes stall mid-season and refuse to ripen, the wood ash tea will move them forward within 2 weeks. And if your compost is sluggish, slow, and acidic, the light dusting at every layer addition will accelerate the entire process. The total investment is zero, assuming you already burn untreated hardwood for heat, recreation, or cooking. The trade-in cost is that you stop sweeping 1 million tons of free fertilizer into the landfill every year alongside your fellow homeowners. The $33 billion potash industry profits from a cycle that begins with you forgetting what your hearth was for. These 4 applications break that cycle permanently. The knowledge was never lost. It was waiting in the ashes, in the research literature, in the hands of the farmers who never needed a bag of mined potassium to grow food. It was waiting in colonial potash works, in Finnish tomato trials, in Slovenian slug studies, in Swedish compost research, and in every grandmother who quietly emptied the wood stove into the vegetable bed each spring without ever calling it science. If this seed was finally freed for you, subscribe to Hank's Gardening Journey and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps break the silence. The next seed breaks free soon.